You'll see there that upward trend is actually weakening. More rand to buy $1 at a high point, 12.98 to the dollar before 4 o'clock this afternoon. So that's just off 13 rand to the dollar. Some of the rand's performance could be linked to the dollar. It works in opposition. It may also be weighed because economic data this week suggests that President Cyril Ramaphosa has a very tough road ahead of him in achieving growth. April's manufacturing data, Bongani spoke about it, mixed strength on a monthly basis but rising annually. The biggest shock, of course, was GDP data showing the South African economy contracted by 2.2% in the first quarter of this year. To discuss, we're joined by Dr Martyn Davies, MD of Emerging Markets and Africa at Deloitte. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Francis. Always good to be here.
The subject matter is not great because we're looking at the rand, and I guess I want to start with this notion that seems to be growing, that maybe we were so excited about the rand rising on the back of the political change, and maybe we were wrong because the rand seems to be buffeted by global forces. Maybe we were just lucky in December, January, February.
Well, the end of last year we had what's called heightened or exacerbated political risk, which was clearly weighing down on the rand. That was very much of an abnormal sort of period. We had a bounce back certainly in Q1 this year, I think, January, February, March, perhaps an over bounce, too much positivity perhaps, too much euphoria. And now reality sets in once again, but the longer term trend again is always the rand will always be, value of the rand will be determined largely by interest rate differentials between ourselves and the US market. And that's typically a 5-6% sort of difference.
And so those interest rates are going up, and
correct.
in Europe as well.
So what's going to happen as we see so-called Fed tightening, a normalization of overly low interest rates in the US, that's generally very bad for emerging market currencies. So the general trend is going to be, I'm afraid, somewhat negative. I think it's fair to say interest rate differentials along with sort of Fed tightening as well. And again, a sense, as you say, allude to maybe the luster of what took place in terms of political shift or partial political shift in December last year has started to wear off.
So then does it matter if we have a business-savvy president at all? Well,
I think, it's beyond having a business-savvy president, having an excellent Minister of Finance and an extremely competent Minister of Public Enterprises is a good start. But let's start to become more of a functional state. I think that's very important. And a state that is increasingly streamlined. As taxpayers, we get better bang for our buck. And we start ultimately to see some good state-owned enterprise reform, not just fixing the boards is one thing, stabilization, ultimately hopefully privatization. I think that'll give a significantly powerful impetus for confidence, both domestic and foreign, in our economy. It's a long-term play. I think the figures this week, you saw the growth figures, I think you alluded to them, 2.2% down on last quarter. That's a bit of a wake-up call. This is not an easy turn at a corner to turn. This is a long, medium-term play, and one which I'm afraid a lot more pain to come, perhaps.
So it's not a fail for the new administration. It's an acknowledgement that it's going to take much longer than we thought, perhaps.
Reality check, undoubtedly. There's a lot of work to go here. This could take a good while. I still think there's been so much damage done by the state, inflicted through state enterprises on our economy in recent years. This ain't going to be a quick fix.
That's where there has been movement in the state-owned entities, but you're saying we need something more sustainable. Is that where you would start?
Well, I think of course. I mean, President Gordon's turnaround in recent months has been fantastic, appointing competent people and honest people to the boards of our SOEs. This is crucial. This is risk number one, I think, in our country. Provided we can stabilize those, we start to get them to function, streamline them somewhat. And as I go back to again, we should not have ideological hang-ups on this. Some sort of at least partial privatization for longer term to avoid the corruption of politics, arguably, and ensure long-term sustainable shareholder discipline through a private shareholding structure.
Starting with the SAA?
Starting perhaps, well, there's quite a number there we should be considering. It's ironic that a country like Ethiopia this week announced mass privatization even of Ethiopian Airlines, which is one of probably the most successful airline in recent years in Africa. And if Ethiopia, which is an incredibly closed economy, one which even 15-20 years ago was made the Soviet Union look quite liberal in terms of economic policy, if they can start privatizing, why can't we?
So the Chamber of Commerce and Industry yesterday, releasing business confidence, spoke about the service delivery process and saying we're seeing businesses being affected in municipalities, affected by service delivery issues, and this. Are they getting to the crux of the matter, the fact that municipalities aren't working? We have 7% getting clean audits. Is maybe that's something we haven't focused on enough?
Stating the obvious, Francis, of course, it's, again, I talk to functional state, both at a central level and particularly local level. And if big business is experiencing these headwinds and can't grow effectively and employ people, which we desperately need to, what impact will it have on small business in often rural locations? I can only imagine. So we need to have this functional state at all levels of the country.
And are the skills there, or do we need to up education and wait for another generation?
We can't wait for another generation. We launched it at Deloitte this year, a Gearing for Growth series. How does business, government, all stakeholders come together and start to drive growth in our economy? It's essential. We had a session today, in fact, on how do we, or the elusive trinity we call it, of reindustrialization, how do we industrialize, create jobs, employment creation, and productivity gains. And I'm afraid those three, you can always have two, but not the three. So, but how do we start to think about these things? It's also almost a mindset shift. Of course, we're always going to need a functional state. We always need a clean state. We need to cut corruption as much as possible. We need to have the basics like healthcare, public goods and services, healthcare, education, security, and the like. But also, I think we need a mindset shift. You know, South Africans, we're too introspective at times, I think. And I think it's we're all in the same boat together. And we need to start working together to drive it forward, no matter where we are, in cities, rural areas, or what stakeholder group we feel we belong to.
And we're competing in this global world. So the president off to the G7, trying to raise that R1 trillion. I mean, it's an incredible amount over 5 years. How possible is that?
Look, it's a nice target to have. We must always have these stretch targets. I think that's a positive thing.
Push ourselves.
Of course, I think I checked the figures from 1994 to 2016, we attracted $86 billion over a period of 22 years. So it is a stretch target, but more important, it's not just about getting foreign capital, it's motivating domestic capital. If local capital is investing in our own economy, we can't expect the foreigners to be investing when local capital is not, of course. But at the same time, it's not just about the money that needs to come to our country, it's about the intellectual property that comes with it. So when we go to the G7 or World Economic Forum as mentioned, wherever it may be, it's our policies need to be less disconnected. Think Home Affairs, for example. We can't go to foreign investors and say we want your money, we just don't want you. That doesn't make sense.
And don't bring your children.
Yes, and you know, we have to realize that skilled people, skilled labor, does not compete with unskilled labor. And I think to get foreigners, to migrants into South Africa who are highly skilled, competent, tertiary educated, why not? I don't see them having any negative impact there at all.
So we're running out of time, but while we've got you, that notion, we were talking about it so often years ago, the gateway to Africa, and we wanted to be the gateway. So did Mauritius, so did a few African countries. Is that competition still on, or you know, do we have the sense that the rest of the world is looking inward now anyway?
As I said earlier, Francis, I don't think the rest of the world is. Donald Trump certainly is, but the rest of the world think Asia particularly is looking outwards, led by the Chinese amongst many others. I think in our case, South Africa, we've lost that grand strategy. Where's our Africa strategy? Where's our global strategy? We've become so insular, introspective, consumed by our own problems, real or perceived. We've lost sight of a broader global competitive game. I think we're going to start to regain it, but where's the grand vision thing coming out of our trade industry department, out of our DIRCO, foreign affairs department? We need to have that grand master plan, and then South Africans understand we're in a very, very globally competitive marketplace. Best we get to the program, but I'm fearing, and perhaps we're so consumed with our own issues, is that the world is changed or changing, and perhaps we're not realizing that.
All right, so get with the program, basically. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Martyn Davies from Deloitte. All right, so we were looking at the rand hitting a 5-month